My sister stood there in court, gripping my husband's hand like she actually belonged next to him. The whole room went still right before she said it. Pay up or step aside. Her voice didn't even waver. Mine didn't either. Across the aisle, I watched my parents inch closer to her, already locking themselves into the version of the story they decided to believe. I could feel their stares pressing into me, like they were waiting for me to fall apart, waiting for me to wear the shame they'd quietly assigned to me. But I didn't crack. I looked each one of them in the eye. And I smiled. They had no clue what I had planned. People loved to think I was always the quiet one, the stable daughter, the dependable sister, the woman who kept her cool unless there was no other option. And for a long time maybe that was true. My life ran on structure. I stuck to routines that kept me grounded. Same coffee spot every morning. Reports reviewed before most people were even awake. Evenings spent with a good book, not a screen. In my world, operations management, order isn't just helpful, it's everything. It's how you stay afloat. And I was good at that. I lived and breathed order. But families have a way of rewriting your story, even while you're still standing in the room. Growing up, Haley was the one who could cry her way out of anything. Break a glass? She cried. Get caught lying? She'd cry even harder. Mom would sweep her into her arms like she was some fragile little thing made of spun sugar. Dad would turn to me and sigh. Can't you be a little more gentle with your sister? So I'd be the one cleaning up the mess. Quietly. Always in the background. While she got to shine. That was the pattern. I kept things running. She got the spotlight. Marcus came into my life years later, drawn to the calm I carried like it was part of me. He once told me, "You make everything feel grounded." And for a long time I believed that meant something important. Maybe it did, until the day that steadiness became the very thing he turned against me. He started using it as proof that I didn't feel things enough. That I was cold, distant. That Haley was just more alive. It's funny how easy it is to turn a weakness into a justification when you need to. At first, the signs were subtle. Quiet talks in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. Laughter between them that lasted just a beat too long. Haley dropping by just to talk, then staying way past midnight. Marcus would defend her every time. I'd smell her perfume lingering in the guest bathroom and tell myself she'd just gone overboard with the spray. I'd pull a shirt from the laundry that wasn't mine, and Marcus would shrug like it didn't matter. Then came the family dinners. The ones where Mom beamed at Haley like she was the only daughter in the room. And Dad would ask Marcus if he was holding up okay with all the pressure Riley puts on herself. I'd sit there, fork in hand, frozen mid-bite, realizing the narrative had shifted, and I was no longer part of the story. Then Haley announced she was pregnant. And she cried. Of course she cried. Mom pulled her in so fast it looked rehearsed. Marcus stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. No one looked at me. Not once. And in that strange, silent moment, I realized the betrayal didn't begin with the affair. It started much earlier. With every moment my family chose comfort over honesty. I wasn't angry yet. I was just starting to wake up. The weeks after Haley's announcement felt like living in a house where someone had gone through in the night and slightly tilted every picture frame. At first glance, nothing looked different. But nothing felt right either. Mom started calling more often, but not to see how I was doing. She just wanted to update me on how fragile Haley was feeling. Dad, meanwhile, thought maybe I should ease up on my workload. As if the tension in my shoulders came from too many spreadsheets and not, the betrayal brewing in my own family. And Marcus, he played his role to perfection. Never outright said I was unstable. He just let it hang there between the lines, wrapped in that gentle, calculated tone people use when they're quietly stacking evidence. She's been overwhelmed lately, he told my parents over dinner, loud enough for me to hear. Then came the sigh. It's been a tough season. Like carrying the burden of my entire emotional state was his noble cross to bear. Haley sat next to him, nodding along with her eyes cast down, just enough to look caring, but not enough to hide how pleased she was. That act? She'd been rehearsing it since childhood. Then the rumors started rolling in. Haley told Mom I'd cried at work. That I snapped at a barista. That I missed an appointment. None of it actually happened. But the truth didn't matter. Not when my family had already decided which story they liked better. One evening, Mom called sounding breathless with concern. "We're worried about you, sweetheart. Marcus is doing his best, but you need support." That was the moment it hit me. They'd rewritten my part in the family script. I wasn't the dependable one anymore. I was the liability. But the real gut punch came in the form of a plain white envelope slipped under my apartment door. A notice to appear in court. Child support hearing. I read it twice. Then again. Thought maybe I'd misread something. But the wording was crystal clear. Haley and Marcus were filing for financial support, arguing that I was the most stable member of the family and should help provide for the child they created behind my back. I took the letter to my parents' house, holding on to some tiny shred of hope that they'd be shocked, that they'd say this was too far, that just maybe they'd still be on my side. But when I walked into the living room, they were already united. Faces calm. Stance firm. "Riley," Dad said, "you're financially secure. You can help." Mom folded her arms. "It's not the baby's fault. Don't punish an innocent child." I asked them flat out if they understood what they were supporting, what Haley and Marcus had done. That's when Haley stepped forward, one hand resting gently on her stomach, the other reaching back to hold Marcus's. "We're building a family," she said softly. "You can either help or step aside." That was the first version of the line she'd later deliver in court. A threat dressed up as reason, a demand wrapped in fake sweetness. And right then something in me shifted. Not an explosion, not a breakdown. It was like a slow, steady tide rising inside me. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just gave a small nod. Because in that moment, everything inside me rearranged. Their story was nearly finished. But they had no clue I was about to take the pen back. That night, after my parents picked their side, I walked into my apartment and felt like a guest in my own space. Nothing looked different. Same eucalyptus candle on the counter. Same pile of reports stacked neatly on my desk. But the air felt thin. Off. Like the walls were paying attention now. I dropped my keys, sat down on the floor, knees pulled tight against my chest, and finally let myself breathe. The silence wasn't loud. It was just heavy. This wasn't grief. Not yet. It was the weight of understanding. They weren't fooled. They weren't lost. They made a choice. They picked the version of the story where Haley was soft, helpless, and I was just strong enough to carry the blame for all of them. I stayed on that floor for a long while, just watching the way the light from the street lamp shifted across the hardwood. At some point my breathing evened out. The breakdown wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet, sealed up tight, the way my family always seemed to expect strength to look on me. But something cracked underneath all that stillness. Something sharp. When I finally stood, it wasn't to cry. It was to get to work. I pulled out my planner, my phone, my laptop, laid it all out in front of me like pieces on a chessboard. I didn't go digging for heartache. I went looking for structure, for the patterns. And sure enough, they were there. Sloppy, bold, careless. Messages from Marcus to Haley during hours he told me he was in training sessions. Haley telling Mom she brought dinner to my place the night I was actually on a business trip. My parents gushing over how Marcus was holding the family together, while Haley was texting a friend about how she was finally living the life she deserved. It wasn't just a string of lies. It was a whole story they built, deliberate and planned. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Mrs. Turner from next door, still in her slippers, holding a little glass dish. "Made too much soup," she said. She always made too much soup. We chatted about the weather and traffic, keeping it light until she paused. Then, almost like a whisper, she said, "I saw Marcus at your sister's place a lot this past spring before everything. I figured you knew." Her words didn't come with judgment, but they still cut deep. Even neighbors had seen what my own family refused to acknowledge. I thanked her, closed the door gently, and sat back down at the table. By 2 a.m., my kitchen was covered in pages, dates, messages, timelines, bits and pieces that didn't mean much on their own. But put together, they told the truth loud and clear. Haley and Marcus weren't just careless. They were calculated. And for the first time, I saw what it would look like if I got calculated too. As the sun started to rise, I gathered everything into a folder: screenshots, notes, timelines, contradictions, receipts. Every page a brick in the foundation of the truth they never expected me to lay down. Later, in court, they'd see that folder and think it meant I was second-guessing. But when I closed it, when I felt that smooth edge under my fingertips and a calm settled into my chest, I knew exactly what it was. It was control. For the first time in months, I didn't feel cornered. I felt ready. I looked down at that folder and just smiled. Because the story? It was mine now. The courthouse had that sterile, serious smell, old paper, varnished wood, history. The kind of smell that reminds you just how many lives have been rearranged in that building. I walked in with that one folder tucked under my arm, heels clicking down the hallway like a countdown timer. Inside, Haley and Marcus were already seated at the petitioner's table. She held his hand, her thumb brushing his knuckles like she'd already won. When she looked up and saw me, her smile shifted, tight, smug. Not nervous, not apologetic. Just that arrogant little grin people get when they think the fight's over and they've already walked away with the prize. My parents sat right behind them, leaning forward like physical reinforcements for their story. Mom gave me a stiff nod. Dad didn't look up at all. Then the judge entered, and the room dropped into silence. We stood. We sat. And the hearing began. Haley's lawyer spoke first. Her voice was smooth as stone, polished, cold, and certain. Your Honor, she began, this case is simple. The child was born into a complicated family situation. Ms. Riley is the only party with stable income and long-term financial consistency. She has already played a role in the support system, and we are requesting a formal contribution to ensure the baby's well-being. My breath stayed even, but I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the folder in my lap. Haley didn't even look at the judge while her lawyer spoke. She looked at me, like she was waiting for me to fall apart right on cue. Then Marcus let out this overly dramatic little throat clear. Riley knows we're just trying to do what's best, he said, his voice heavy with fake sincerity. She knows. She's always been the responsible one. Responsible. Not betrayed. Not wronged. Just reliable. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so calculated. Then Haley stood. She laced her fingers through Marcus's and faced the judge, lower lip trembling like she'd practiced it. We're not asking for much, she said, voice soft, eyes full. Just help. My sister understands family responsibility. Or at least she used to. Behind them, Mom murmured, that's right. Like she was giving Haley a gold star. The judge turned to me. Miss Riley, do you have a response? This was the moment Haley had been banking on. The one she thought would break me. She expected the version of me who stayed quiet. The girl who stepped aside. The one who cleaned up the shattered glass while everyone else got a hug. Instead, I calmly reached for my folder and stood. Before I opened it, I looked straight at Haley and smiled. For just a second her face flickered. Barely noticeable, but there it was, doubt. Then I opened the folder. Your Honor, I said, I do have a response, and I'd like to begin by clarifying a few things. I placed the first page on the table. A printed message thread, complete with timestamps and locations. This, I said, tapping the sheet, is Marcus messaging Haley during times he told me, and told others, he was at work. This pattern goes back several months. The judge leaned forward, adjusting their glasses. Haley's face went pale. I kept going. These, I continued, sliding another page forward, are screenshots of Haley telling my mother that I broke down crying at work, on a day I was actually in Seattle at a conference. I laid down a copy of the itinerary, clearly dated. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents exchange glances, uncertainty finally slipping into their perfectly rehearsed roles. Haley whispered, "That's taken out of context." I didn't even glance her way. I wasn't finished. This, I said, setting down another page, is a written statement from Mrs. Turner, my neighbor, confirming she saw Marcus visiting Haley's apartment regularly, months before my marriage ended. And then I laid down the next sheet. This is Marcus texting Haley after one of those visits. He wrote, "It's better if Riley thinks we're helping her." There was a sharp gasp from somewhere in the back of the courtroom. Marcus jerked in his seat. "That's private." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down." I opened my notebook again, voice steady as ever. "I'd like to continue reading my notes if I may," I said quietly. Because everyone in that courtroom had assumed their version of events was the only one that mattered. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to raise my voice. I read out dates where Haley claimed I was unstable, matched with video footage of me giving calm, clear department presentations. I read entries detailing when Marcus told my parents I was snapping or shutting down, followed by messages where he reassured Haley, "It's working. They think she's losing it." Haley's eyes started to fill, but not with emotion. This wasn't sadness. It was fear. Real unfiltered panic. Marcus's face turned bright red. "Riley, stop. This isn't. This is exactly what it is," I said. Then I pulled out the final page. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just a timeline. Color-coded. Precise. Undeniable. "This," I said, placing the final page in front of the judge, "is a communication audit. It outlines the months of manipulation that led us here today. You'll see coordinated messaging, deliberate misinformation, and a clear effort to twist family loyalty into a tool for financial leverage." The room went still, thick, silent, like the air had settled into dust. Then the judge leaned back in their chair and turned to Haley and Marcus. "Your petition for support is denied. Furthermore," they added, voice sharp but measured, "this court is deeply concerned by the pattern of deception presented today. You may be subject to additional review for possible abuse of legal process." Mom let out a sharp gasp. Dad muttered something I couldn't quite hear. Haley clung to Marcus like he was the last thing keeping her upright. Marcus stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. They looked small. And then it all came undone. The panic they'd been holding back, pretending wasn't there, finally cracked open. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was raw. The sound that came from them wasn't a scream for show. It was that broken, choking kind of cry that only comes when people realize the lie they lived in just collapsed around them. The truth they thought they buried? It had claws. And today it dug its way out. I closed my folder quietly, like you'd shut the back cover of a book you've read too many times and never want to revisit. The bailiff called for order, but it was pointless. There was no going back to order. Not for them. Not anymore. I turned, smoothed my blazer, and walked out of that courtroom without once looking behind me. I didn't need to. I already knew everything had changed. Outside, the Portland air hit different. It was crisp, clean, like the city itself had let out a long breath with me. I didn't hurry. I didn't check to see if anyone followed. For the first time in a long while, the world around me was finally quiet. Faint voices still echoed behind me. My parents asking questions, demanding explanations. Haley crying. Marcus saying, "This wasn't how it was supposed to go." But none of it touched me anymore. None of it was mine to carry. I walked down those courthouse steps slow and steady, feeling each moment land and settle. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was freedom. For the first time in years, I felt like my body was mine again. My breath. My direction. My future. My phone buzzed. A single message from Mom. "We didn't know." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need an audience. And some betrayals don't deserve a second pass. At the corner, I paused and waited for the light to change, watching leaves scatter across the pavement. I wasn't walking away from them. I was finally walking back to myself. In the end, this wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about choosing me, after years of being pushed out of my own story. And if you've ever had to rebuild after something like that, you're not alone. Drop your story in the comments, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.